So I am told by the establishment here in the U.S. that Bernie Sanders is not practical. He can't get things done. Well, that's funny. Zed Jelani at Alternet, also, of course, originally at The Intercept is where he published this, did an interesting analysis. He explains that over the past few decades, the House of Representatives was only controlled by the Democrats from 2007 to 2010. So for all the rest of that time, from 94 to now, the House has been controlled by Republicans. So who is the amendment king? Well, you can see from the graphics, but there he is, Bernie Sanders. Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. If the Republicans controlled it for all that time, wouldn't it be a Republican that passed the most amount of amendments into the bills that they passed? And so if you don't understand that, let me explain. They'll have bills like a budget bill that's gonna pass no matter what. The question is, how many amendments can you get put in there to actually effectuate change? And how can you get a bipartisan coalition to agree to those amendments, to put them in the bill and have that become law? Well, it turns out it wasn't a Republican who had the most amount of amendments that whole time. It should have been Tom DeLay or Dennis Hastert or John Boehner or Paul Ryan, but it wasn't any of them. And it wasn't Hillary Clinton or any other establishment Democrat. It was Bernie Sanders, #1 in most amendments passed in that time period. What happened? I thought he couldn't get anything done. Do you see how the establishment media lies to you day in, day out? That's the guy that they sneered at. And they've been sneering at Bernie Sanders the whole time. Bill Richardson also used to be a congressman. He later became a governor of New Mexico. And he said about Bernie at the time, it is virtually impossible for an independent to be effective in the House. Well, Bill, what were you up to? I don't remember you passing a lot of amendments. Turns out it is possible. And what's the key? Just try. You'll be amazed at what you accomplish if you just try. And Bernie would try over and over again, and he would succeed more than any other colleague. Now, Barney Frank, who famously stood up for Hillary Clinton during the elections and told us, what do you guys want us to do? Let the Republicans get 100% of the banker money instead of just 80%? Yes, Barney, that's what we want. Taking 20% of the banker money and doing what they want gets you perpetual losses. You are outgunned 4-1. Get money out of politics, you schmuck. That's practical, that's real, that makes all the difference instead of just getting your ass handed to you for decade after decade. Anyway, back then he said about Bernie and other independents, actually there are almost no other independents, so this was definitely a shot at Bernie. He said, as an independent, you're kind of a homeless waif. Oh, okay. And then he went on to say, Bernie's holier than thou attitude, saying in a very loud voice he's smarter than everyone else and purer than everyone else, really undercuts his effectiveness. No, it doesn't. As you're about to see, he passed tremendous amendments into those legislations. And I'm gonna tell you what they are in a sec. But what Barney Frank is actually saying is, he's annoying the rest of us by pointing out how deeply corrupt we all are. Why won't he just be as corrupt as we are? He's so annoying with his holier than thou, where he actually cares about policy and actually gets it done, while we're all sitting here taking donor money and serving them. I hate Bernie. That's why the Democratic establishment hates Bernie Sanders and progressives who are not corrupt more than they hate Republicans. Republicans, they're playing patty cakes with. They're all part of the same system. You win, I become a lobbyist. What difference does it make, right? We all get to keep our jobs. If Bernie wins, the Democratic establishment doesn't keep their jobs. Then all of a sudden their corruption matters and it costs them their job. So to them, Bernie Sanders is so much more of a threat than even Donald Trump. This is why they've been attacking him for decades now, even though they're 100% wrong on the facts. So, Zed Jelani explains, despite the fact that the most right-wing Republicans in a generation controlled the House of Representatives between 1994 and 2006, the member who passed the most amendments during that time was not a right-winger like Bob Barr or John Boehner. The amendment king was instead Bernie Sanders. Now, to be fair, I mentioned Hillary Clinton earlier. She's in the Senate. This was in the House of Representatives. But Barney Frank was in the House. He didn't pass the most, and he had a tremendous amount of power. And he's talking about how Bernie Sanders couldn't be effective. Well, he passed a lot more amendments than you did, Barney. What were you doing? I know, collecting cash, cold hard cash from your donors. Okay, anyway. So now let me give you the exhaustive list of the amendments that Bernie Sanders got passed. The corporate crime accountability. You know how he did that? He shamed them into it, saying, hey, aren't you Republicans for law and order? What, are you gonna let corporate criminals get away with it? Boom, got it passed. Saving money for colleges and taxpayers. All the way back in 98. This is why people like him, because he's been on that same warpath. He's like, come on, everybody should get to live the American dream. It should be more affordable college. He says, then holding IRS accountable, protecting pensions. Deeply popular, he embarrassed them into another vote where they won, July 2002. Expanding free health care. They call it a broken record, we call it honesty. Back in 01, he got that passed. Getting tough on child labor, 01, he got it passed. Increasing funding for heating for the poor. With a deeply Republican House back in 04, still gets it passed. Fighting corporate welfare and protecting against nuclear disasters, 05, gets it passed. What happened? I thought he couldn't be effective. Now we go to the Senate. Greening the US government, gets it passed. Protecting our troops, gets it passed. Restricting the bailout to protect US workers. Now, both Republicans and Democrats at the time, happy to do those bailouts, and they didn't want a lot of the money going to US workers, they wanted to go to their banker donors. But he embarrassed them, made a public vote, and won. You win by fighting, you win by trying. Helping veteran kids win, helping veteran kids, that was a win as well. Exposing corruption in the military-industrial complex. In Republican Senate, and well, at that point, you've got Republicans and Democrats in there. It's pretty close at that point. He still gets the win. You think the Democrats don't love the military-industrial complex? They love it too, but he exposes their corruption and he gets a win. Support for treating autism in military health care, win. Win after win after win. Building, by the way, most of the time, bipartisan coalitions to get those wins. What happened? I thought he couldn't be effective. Remember that lie that not only the other Democrats and Hillary Clinton's team, but the media repeated over and over again during the primaries. Oh, he's not effective, it's not practical. You never did 1 ounce of research on it, did you? Okay. Now, Zed explains one interesting moment here. He said, another moment came when Sanders, who was then chair of the Veterans Committee, worked with Senator John McCain to overhaul the Veterans Administration. McCain praised Sanders' work on the bill in an interview with National Journal. Senator Jack Reed even went so far as to say the bill would have never passed without Sanders' ability to bring the parties to a deal. What happened? I thought he'll never get a deal with the Republicans. It turns out if you try and you stick to your guns, you actually can get deals done. It's not a matter of being holier than thou. It's not a matter of being pure. It's about actually caring to deliver for the American people. And if you do it the right way, you can even sometimes get Republicans to go along. What is John McCain gonna do after Bernie Sanders said, are you gonna help veterans, John, or are you not? He's gonna have to raise his hand and say, okay, fine, I'm gonna help the veterans. That's effective, that's practical. Okay, couple more here. Sanders was able to get the first ever audit of funds given out by the Federal Reserve, which made transparent over $2 trillion of funds handed out by the secretive organization. That is a giant win. He worked with some right-wing legislators there who also had issues with the Federal Reserve to say, hey, look, we're not gonna shut down the Federal Reserve. We're just asking for an audit. It's maybe the most powerful force on earth, and you're telling us we can't even know where your money is, what you spend it on. What does the Fed spend their money on? How are you structuring the bailouts? And these are such fair requests, but the establishment, the lackeys that they are, had never even bothered to ask. And when Bernie asked, and he brought together a bipartisan coalition, they did it, and we got the audit of the Federal Reserve. Maybe the most effective legislator of our time, and they told you the exact opposite. One last lie of the establishment is, oh yeah, maybe as a legislator, although they would never concede that. Maybe they should actually do research and be in the news business. Anyway, but if he's an executive, he can't get things done. So he was only an executive once when he was the mayor of Burlington. So let's go to that time and see what happens. They say that in his 8 years as mayor, he rejuvenated a city that was considered by many to be dying, laying out progressive policies that cities around the country later adopted. He's been right for 40 to 50 years. They hold that against him. We see that as a reason to vote for him, not to vote against him. They're like, the guy never changes. He says he's for progressive politics and policies that worked and was copied around the country. How bad? Why is that bad? That's great. Okay, last part of Burlington. When Sanders was mayor of Burlington, one of his big accomplishments was to increase civic life in the city. During the course of his terms, voter turnout doubled. So when Bernie Sanders talks about a political revolution and Anderson Cooper sneers at him as he did during the debates and goes, yeah, but how are you actually going to get it done, Bernie? He says, well, a political revolution is that more people come out and vote. We get real change. We get the legislators that we think are going to bring you that change. That's the political revolution. And then we get it done. Right. Getting more people to vote. Right. Good luck with that, Bernie. Well, he's already done it. That is a stunning number. It didn't go up by 25%. Voter turnout doubled when Bernie Sanders was mayor of Burlington, Vermont. Everything the mainstream media told you about Bernie Sanders is a lie. Look at all the research, do your own research. Thank God for the internet, because now we can do that and we're not stuck on that propaganda called cable news. So now, by the way, one final piece of the lie, not having to do with what a great job he didn't get all this legislation passed. They tell you, Bernie Sanders, okay, fine, all right, you got us, fine, he was an effective legislator, fine, he's now the most popular politician in the country. Now some of them are even finally saying, fine, I guess he would have beat Donald Trump. So we were right about all of that, right? And a 12-point lead on Donald Trump on the day of the election. Oh, but he didn't run an election. They would have run ads against him. Really? Is that how elections work? Wow, you guys are so smart. Anyway, but they say, no, all of that is irrelevant, guys, because we're just going to eliminate him based on age. At the next election, he's going to be 79. Well, that's it. We're at the end of the conversation. So, hey, establishment, who's your leading candidate now? Look, I love Booker and Gillibrand and those guys. But you know what? The guy touring Iowa and going to all these different early voting states is maybe the guy that should have won all along. Joe Biden. Joe Biden's great. Yeah, Joe Biden. And he's a kind of a regular guy, right? I mean, he takes the train every once in a while, but the establishment absolutely loves him. So, just a real quick question for you guys. How old is Joe Biden going to be at the same time in the 2020 elections? 78. So Bernie will be 79 and Joe Biden will be 78. What happened? You thought age was determinative, that it was the main thing that matters, that we can't even consider Bernie because of how old he is. But not one person has written about how Joe Biden would be too old to run for president. It's almost as if the establishment doesn't like to have their boat rocked, and they think Bernie Sanders could actually get things done, and that's what they're afraid of. Young Turks.